The structure before me, an innocuous-looking hospital in a quiet part of London, was officially completed in 1892. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a typical Victorian medical facility. Its facade, adorned with intricate stonework, evoked a sense of established grandeur. But as I began to examine the building in closer detail, something stood out. One of the windows near the basement was sealed from the inside, yet the documentation suggested this area was a simple storage room. Digging into the archival records, I found something unexpected. The blueprints from 1891 detailed an expansive underground network which had been, according to renovation records, decommissioned. A closer look at the construction photos from the early 1900s revealed stonework that seemed far too precise for the era. While official records suggest nothing unusual, the discrepancies raised a question. Why, in a hospital built in the late 19th century, was there such an elaborate underground system? Could this be part of a much older infrastructure, one that some researchers now associate with what was once called Tartaria? I had expected the research to be straightforward. The Royal Victoria Hospital, located at 52 Victoria Street in London's Westminster district, was officially opened on the 14th of March 1892. The building was designed by Henry Saxon Snell, an architect known for his work on institutional buildings throughout the British Empire. According to the London County Council records, construction began in 1888 and proceeded without incident. The hospital was described in period journals as a modern facility befitting the capital of the empire, equipped with 40 beds, 2 surgical theatres, and a small dispensary. Nothing in the official record suggested anything unusual. Yet the photographs told a different story. While examining a collection of construction images held at the Wellcome Library, I noticed something that did not fit the narrative. One photograph, dated June 1889, showed workers standing beside what appeared to be a foundation wall, but the wall was not being built, it was being excavated. The caption, handwritten in faded ink, read, "Clearing lower chambers, west wing." The official timeline claimed construction had only just begun on the main structure. Why would workers be clearing chambers that should not yet exist? The deeper I examined these photographs, the more anomalies appeared. The stonework visible in the excavated chambers showed a level of precision that seemed inconsistent with the rough labour of foundation work. The blocks were cut with geometric exactness, their edges meeting at angles so fine they appeared almost machine-finished. Some researchers who study what they call Tartarian architecture point to precisely this kind of stonework as a hallmark of a lost building tradition, one that predates the industrial methods of the Victorian era. I was not yet ready to draw conclusions, but I could not ignore what the photographs showed. The foundation photographs led me to the original engineering drawings preserved in the London Metropolitan Archives. According to these documents, the hospital's lower level was designed as a simple basement for coal storage and mechanical systems. But the drawings themselves contradicted this description. The plans showed a network of interconnected chambers extending well beyond the footprint of the building above. Some of these spaces were marked with symbols I did not recognize, circular notations that appeared nowhere in standard Victorian architectural conventions. One detail in particular caught my attention. The plans included a series of vertical shafts connecting the underground chambers to the surface. These were labelled ventilation conduits, but their dimensions suggested a different purpose. Each shaft was precisely 18 inches in diameter, lined with what the drawings described as vitrified brick. Vitrified brick, clay fired at temperatures high enough to create a glass-like surface, was used in Victorian sewer construction, but rarely in hospital ventilation. The precision of these shafts, their uniform diameter maintained across multiple levels, suggested engineering capabilities that should not have been available in 1888. A renovation report from 1915 offered another piece of the puzzle. The document, filed with the Westminster Borough Council, noted that certain underground features of uncertain provenance had been sealed during modernization work. The report did not specify what these features were, only that they had been filled with concrete and their access points bricked over. The language was clinical, almost dismissive, but the act of sealing suggested something more deliberate than routine maintenance. What had been found beneath the hospital that required such permanent concealment? Maps from the 18th century, some labelled with the old designation Grande Tartarie, show London's Westminster district as part of a larger European infrastructure network. I could not help but wonder if these sealed chambers were remnants of something far older than the Victorian hospital built above them. The sealed doorway appeared in a photograph from 1912. The image, part of a collection documenting hospital renovations, showed a corridor in the lower level. At the end of the corridor stood a doorway, or rather, what had once been a doorway. The opening had been filled with brick, the work fresh enough that the mortar still showed light against the darker surrounding stone. What struck me was not the ceiling itself, but the frame. The doorway was constructed with an arch of precisely fitted stones, each block cut to a slightly different angle to create a smooth curve. This was not standard Victorian brickwork. This was something else entirely. I measured the doorway's proportions from the photograph using the known dimensions of standard hospital corridor widths. The arch followed what appeared to be a catenary curve, the natural shape formed by a hanging chain, mathematically optimal for distributing weight. Catenary arches were understood theoretically in the Victorian era, but they were rarely used in practical construction due to the difficulty of calculating and cutting the required stone angles. The precision visible in this doorway suggested either extraordinary skill or access to techniques that mainstream historical accounts do not acknowledge. The dimensions of the sealed opening were also unusual. At approximately 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall, it was far larger than any standard doorway would need to be. The scale suggested that whatever lay beyond was designed for purposes other than simple foot traffic. Some Tartarian researchers point to oversized doorways and passages as evidence of a lost architectural tradition designed for purposes we no longer understand. I remained cautious about such interpretations, but the evidence before me, the precise stonework, the mathematical sophistication, the deliberate concealment, demanded an explanation that the official record did not provide. The construction photographs from 1892 revealed more than the official documentation suggested. I obtained a set of 23 images from the Wellcome collection, each carefully labelled with dates and locations within the hospital site. Most showed typical Victorian construction, scaffolding, workers in period clothing, partially completed walls. But 3 photographs stood out. These images, taken in what was described as the lower service area, showed stonework that did not match the rest of the construction. In one photograph, dated August 1891, a chamber was visible with walls composed of massive stone blocks. Each block appeared to weigh several tons based on comparison with the workers standing nearby. The surfaces were smooth, almost polished, and the joints between blocks were so fine that they seemed to disappear entirely. Victorian construction typically relied on smaller stones bonded with generous amounts of mortar. What I was looking at suggested a different building tradition entirely, one where precision eliminated the need for mortar, where the weight and fit of the stones themselves provided structural integrity. The ceiling of this chamber showed something even more remarkable. A series of shallow domes created a coffered pattern, each dome precisely identical to its neighbours. The symmetry was perfect, the curves geometrically consistent. A handwritten note on the back of the photograph read, "Pre-existing structure, west foundation." The implication was clear. The builders of the Victorian hospital had not created this chamber, they had found it. What they found bore all the characteristics that contemporary researchers associate with Tartarian architecture: the massive scale, the impossible precision, the geometric sophistication. The official record made no mention of this discovery. The chamber simply appeared in photographs and then, based on later documentation, was sealed and forgotten. The precision of the stonework demanded closer examination. Using high-resolution scans of the original photographs, I measured the angles and proportions of the visible blocks. The results were troubling. The stones appeared to be cut with tolerances of less than 1/16th of an inch, a level of precision that would challenge modern machining and should have been impossible with 19th-century hand tools. The angles were not approximate, they were mathematically exact. Each block fit its neighbors with no visible gap, no accommodation for the irregularities that characterize hand-cut stone. I consulted with a structural engineer who specializes in historic buildings. Her assessment was cautious but revealing. This level of precision, she noted, would require either extremely sophisticated measuring instruments or a manufacturing process we don't associate with this period. She pointed to the uniformity of the blocks as particularly significant. In traditional stone construction, each block is individually shaped to fit its specific location. Here, the blocks appeared to be interchangeable, cut to identical specifications and assembled like modern prefabricated components. The implications extended beyond mere craftsmanship. Achieving this level of precision with hand tools would have required extraordinary skill and enormous amounts of time. The chamber visible in the photographs contained hundreds of such blocks. Either a large workforce of master stonemasons had labored for years in secret, or the stones had been cut using methods not acknowledged in conventional historical accounts. Researchers who study Tartarian architecture often point to exactly this kind of precision as evidence of lost technologies. I found myself unable to dismiss their observations. The stones were there in the photographs, their precision undeniable. How they came to be remained an open question that the official narrative could not answer. The hydraulic system discovered beneath the hospital defied easy explanation. The engineering drawings showed a network of pipes, valves, and pressure chambers extending through the underground levels. The official documentation described this as a modern water distribution system installed during the original construction. But the photographs told a different story. The pipes visible in the images were not the cast iron typical of Victorian plumbing. They appeared to be made of a ceramic material, their surfaces glazed and their joints sealed with a substance that resisted identification. One photograph, dated 1890, showed what the caption described as a pressure regulation chamber. The chamber contained a series of valves arranged in a geometric pattern, 3 concentric circles with valves positioned at regular intervals. The purpose of such an arrangement was not clear from Victorian engineering principles. Standard water distribution required simple, linear pipe runs with occasional shut-off valves. This system suggested something more complex, a method of controlling pressure across multiple circuits simultaneously, perhaps for purposes beyond simple water delivery. The renovation records from 1915 mentioned the hydraulic system only briefly. The report noted that obsolete pressure equipment in the lower levels had been disconnected and filled. No explanation was offered for why a water system only 25 years old would be considered obsolete, or why it required permanent elimination rather than simple disconnection. A maintenance log from 1908 offered a cryptic observation. Pressure in western conduit remains constant despite isolation from main supply, source unknown. How could a sealed hydraulic system maintain pressure with no external connection? The entry was never followed up. The system was sealed 7 years later, its mystery buried beneath tons of concrete. Tartarian infrastructure theories often reference exactly this kind of anomalous, hydraulic engineering. I found no better explanation for what the documents described. As I mapped the underground chambers from the available documentation, a pattern emerged that I had not anticipated. The layout of the spaces beneath the Royal Victoria Hospital did not follow the rectangular grid typical of Victorian institutional design. Instead, the chambers radiated outward from a central point, connected by corridors that formed precise angles. When I overlaid the plan on a geometric template, the correspondence was striking. The underground layout followed a star fort pattern, the distinctive multi-pointed design associated with military fortifications of the 16th and 17th centuries. Star fort designs are typically attributed to Renaissance military engineers who developed the pattern to deflect cannon fire, but some researchers have noted that similar layouts appear in structures that predate the cannon, buildings whose purpose remains unclear. The geometry serves other functions beyond military defense. The angles create natural acoustic properties, the radiating corridors allow for efficient distribution of air and water, and the central space can function as a hub for various systems. Whether the builders intended these functions or simply inherited a design template they did not fully understand, the pattern persists across continents and centuries. The Royal Victoria's underground layout matched star fort geometry with remarkable precision. 5 primary corridors extended from a central chamber, each at exactly 72 degrees from its neighbours. Secondary chambers branched from these corridors at consistent intervals. The symmetry was not approximate, it was mathematically exact. A blueprint notation from 1889 acknowledged this peculiarity. Foundation follows pre-existing geometric constraints, original purpose unknown. The architect had not designed this pattern. They had built around it, incorporating structures they found already in place. This is precisely what Tartarian researchers describe when they discuss repurposed infrastructure, new buildings erected atop older foundations whose origins have been forgotten or deliberately obscured. The patterns observed in London were not unique. As I expanded my research, I found strikingly similar anomalies in hospital buildings across Europe and North America. The Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia, founded in 1751 but substantially rebuilt in 1804, contains underground chambers with the same massive stonework and geometric precision. The Hôtel Dieu in Paris, parts of which date to the 12th century, sits atop a network of vaulted passages whose construction methods remain unexplained. The Charité Hospital complex in Berlin, developed through the 18th and 19th centuries, features hydraulic systems that engineers have struggled to date definitively. In each case, the official narrative attributes these features to the documented construction period. Yet the physical evidence suggests something different. The stonework predates the claimed construction dates. The engineering exceeds the documented capabilities of the period. The layouts follow geometric patterns that appear across institutions separated by oceans and decades. A photograph from the Philadelphia Hospital archives dated 1847 shows workers excavating a chamber with the same coffered dome ceilings I had observed in the London photographs. A report from Berlin, written in 1872, notes the discovery of ancient hydraulic apparatus of unknown function beneath the hospital's east wing. The consistency of these discoveries defied coincidence. Different architects, different countries, different decades, yet the same anomalies appeared again and again. Massive stones cut with impossible precision, hydraulic systems too sophisticated for their claimed era, geometric layouts following patterns that transcended individual design choices. Old maps labeled Tartaria showed these regions as interconnected territories of a vast civilization. The maps were later dismissed as geographic confusion. But if the Tartarian civilization was real, if it built infrastructure across what we now call separate nations, these patterns would be exactly what we might expect to find. I could not prove this connection, but I could no longer dismiss it. The evidence of systematic erasure became impossible to ignore. Across multiple institutions, the same pattern repeated: underground features discovered, briefly documented, then sealed and removed from official records. The Royal Victoria Hospital was not an isolated case. It was part of a broader phenomenon that spanned continents and decades. The consistencies suggested coordination, though proving such coordination remained beyond my reach. In Boston, the Massachusetts General Hospital underwent major renovations in 1846. Construction records from that period mention the discovery of subterranean chambers of unusual construction beneath the surgical wing. These chambers were described as having walls of fitted stone requiring no mortar and ceiling vaults of remarkable symmetry. Within 2 years, the chambers had been filled with rubble and the access points sealed. The renovation records for 1848 make no mention of them. A similar pattern emerged in Vienna, where the Allgemeines Krankenhaus documented underground discoveries in 1784 that had vanished from official records by 1800. The timing of these erasures followed a recognizable pattern. Discoveries were typically made during construction or renovation. Initial documentation was created, often including photographs or detailed descriptions. Within a decade, sometimes less, the discovered features were sealed and subsequent documentation omitted any reference to them. The process was thorough but not perfect. Photographs survived in private collections. Construction reports were filed and forgotten in municipal archives. Maintenance logs recorded anomalies that later administrators chose not to explain. Piece by piece, the evidence accumulated, a civilization's infrastructure being systematically concealed, its traces erased from institutional memory. Tartarian researchers call this the Great Reset, a coordinated effort to eliminate evidence of a predecessor culture. The pattern I observed was consistent with their hypothesis, though I remained uncertain whether coordination or simple institutional embarrassment explained the behavior. The global signatures could not be explained by coincidence or parallel development. Across 4 continents, hospital buildings constructed in different eras by different architects shared features that defied independent invention. The same massive stone blocks cut with the same impossible precision, the same geometric layouts following star-fort patterns, the same hydraulic systems using ceramic pipes and pressure regulation chambers, the same coffered dome ceilings with mathematically identical curves. The consistency demanded explanation. I compiled measurements from 23 institutions across 12 countries. The results were striking. The dome curvatures matched to within fractions of a degree. The stone block dimensions clustered around a handful of standard sizes. The star-fort angles maintained their 72-degree precision regardless of location or claimed construction date. The hydraulic pipe diameters fell within a narrow range, as if manufactured to a common specification. This was not the variation one would expect from independent craftsmen working in isolation. This was standardization, the kind of consistency that implies either a shared tradition or a common source. Mainstream architectural history offers no framework for understanding these patterns. The institutions I studied were supposedly built by different cultures, using different techniques for different purposes, yet their underground features spoke a common language, a language of geometric precision and engineering sophistication that transcended the capabilities documented for each period. The old maps that showed Tartaria as spanning from Eastern Europe across Asia to the Pacific suggested a civilization vast enough to maintain such standards. The physical evidence beneath these hospitals was consistent with that possibility. What I could not determine was whether we were looking at Tartarian construction or simply at human capabilities that official history had failed to record. Either way, the evidence challenged everything I had been taught about the development of architectural knowledge. The renovations that destroyed unknown technologies followed a consistent script. In each institution I studied, modernization projects of the late 19th and early 20th centuries targeted the anomalous underground features with particular intensity. Hydraulic systems were disconnected and filled with concrete. Chambers were sealed with brick and rubble. Access points were walled over and removed from facility maps. The official justification was always the same: obsolete equipment, safety concerns, the need for modern infrastructure. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. The destruction was thorough, but not complete. At the Royal Victoria Hospital, renovation workers in 1952 accidentally breached a sealed chamber during foundation work. The incident report, which I located in the Westminster Archives, described a vaulted space approximately 40 feet square, walls of polished stone, floor covered with ceramic tiles in geometric pattern. The chamber was resealed within 48 hours. No photographs were taken, or at least none survived in the official record. A worker's personal diary, preserved by his descendants, offered additional detail. The chamber felt cold, much colder than the surrounding earth. There were channels in the floor, like something had flowed through them. The foreman said not to speak of it. Why the secrecy? Why the systematic elimination of features that, if merely old-fashioned, could simply have been left in place? The intensity of the destruction suggested that these features represented something more troubling than outdated technology. They challenged the official narrative of architectural development. They implied capabilities that should not have existed. They pointed toward a civilization, perhaps the Tartaria of old maps, whose achievements exceeded what we were supposed to believe possible. The erasure was not merely practical, it was ideological. Something had to be hidden, and hidden it was beneath tons of concrete and decades of institutional silence. The synthesis of evidence across multiple structures pointed toward conclusions I was reluctant to draw. The Royal Victoria Hospital in London, the Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia, the Hôtel Dieu in Paris, the Charité in Berlin, each institution shared features that could not be explained by the official construction narratives: massive stonework predating claimed construction dates, hydraulic systems exceeding documented technological capabilities, geometric layouts following patterns that appeared across continents with mathematical precision. The evidence was consistent and cumulative. I could not prove that these features were Tartarian in origin. The civilization that appeared on old maps, that spanned the territories we now divide among nations, left no written records that have survived, or none that have been acknowledged. What remained was physical evidence: stones that should not exist, systems that should not function, patterns that should not repeat. The mainstream explanation that Victorian builders independently developed identical techniques to unknown earlier standards required a series of coincidences so improbable as to strain credibility. The alternative explanation that these features were inherited from a predecessor civilization, possibly the Tartaria of cartographic tradition, remained speculative but increasingly difficult to dismiss. What troubled me most was not the evidence itself, but the response to it: the systematic sealing of chambers, the removal of features from official records, the destruction of hydraulic systems whose function was never explained. These actions suggested that someone at some point had recognized the implications of what lay beneath these buildings. The decision to conceal rather than investigate spoke to a deeper discomfort, a recognition that the evidence challenged fundamental assumptions about history and human capability. Whether that concealment was coordinated or simply reflected parallel institutional embarrassment, its effect was the same: the erasure of a past that did not fit the narrative we had constructed. I returned to the photograph that had begun my investigation, the sealed doorway in the lower level of the Royal Victoria Hospital. The image remained unchanged: the bricked-over arch, the precisely fitted stones of the frame, the shadow that suggested depth beyond the barrier. But my understanding of what I was looking at had transformed. This was not simply a Victorian renovation. This was an act of concealment, one repeated across institutions and continents, one that hid evidence of capabilities we have been taught did not exist. The doorway remained sealed. The chambers beyond remained inaccessible. The hydraulic systems had been filled with concrete decades ago. Whatever knowledge those spaces once contained, whatever purposes they once served, had been locked away, perhaps permanently. The official record offered no answers because the official record had been carefully purged of questions. What remained were fragments, photographs in private collections, construction reports in forgotten archives, the quiet observations of workers who had been told not to speak of what they found. I cannot claim certainty about what these fragments reveal. The evidence points toward infrastructure predating its claimed construction, toward precision exceeding documented capabilities, toward patterns too consistent for coincidence. Whether this infrastructure is Tartarian in the sense that alternative researchers use that term, I cannot definitively say, but I can say that the explanation we have been given, that each institution independently developed these features using techniques that happen to match identical specifications, does not account for what the photographs show. Something was built beneath these hospitals, something was found, something was hidden. The sealed doorway in the photograph holds its secret still, and across continents, identical doorways wait in identical silence, remnants of a history we have not yet been permitted to remember.